Join us in the fight to restore liberty and American exceptionalism. Together, let's make the case that our charters of freedom are worth defending and honoring. Right here is where the great American experiment comes alive. Let's get to work. Well, I first have to ask, somebody's got just an incredible bumper sticker, and I want to know where you got it. It says, a person voting for Obama is like a chicken voting for Colonel Sanders. I want to know who's got that. That is great stuff. My name is Shane Krauser. I am from Arizona. I'm the director of the American Academy for Constitutional Education, and we do exactly what the title would suggest. We travel the country focusing on the Constitution, on the rule of law, and really the restoration of America that needs to take place. I was a prosecutor for 12 years, and I retired about a year ago to focus on this mission full time. And I first and foremost want to thank so many of you. There's so many of you in here that were instrumental in bringing us out here, provided the finances to bring us here. And so we very much thank you for making this happen. And we are here for 6 days. Yesterday and also Saturday night, we were out at Pinion Hills Community Church, spent a lot of time with the congregations there. And then last night we had a community event, and we've got many more events throughout the week. So we're very excited to be able to interact with the community throughout the coming days. So thank you. So let me just ask you, I want to dialogue with you a little bit and get your thoughts on some things. If you could change one issue, one problem in this country, what would that thing be that you would focus on that you believe would begin to get us back on track rather swiftly? What would be that issue for you?
Personal responsibility.
Well, what do you mean by personal responsibility?
Trying to instill into the populace of this country that you have a responsibility to take care of yourself and those issues you can take care of.
Can you give an example of where you think we're falling short when it comes to personal responsibility?
It would be easier to say the places that we're welfare state.
Okay.
The right to make sure that you and your family are taken care of, both defensively and food and economically.
Very good. Other thoughts? I mean, I believe the welfare state is significant. What we've done in this country is we've created a dynamic that encourages individuals to be lazy. And it comes through a system that we've allowed to develop. Individuals who are in office, and I know there's a lot of guys here in office, and of course you aren't the culprits here. I'm gonna make that assumption. But we know that there are individuals at the federal level, the state level, and at the local level that are interested in two things: elections and re-elections. And when you've created a culture that looks at what can this politician offer me, and the politician looks back and says, well, I can offer freedom, but giving away free stuff sounds like a better deal from the perspective of the mainstream. What do we begin to do? We create a welfare state that has absolutely killed this country. Personal responsibility has gone out the window. And I think that's a significant concern that we're dealing with today. Is there any other thoughts that if you could change one thing? Yes?
The separation of powers are cloudy. The Supreme Court is legislating from the bench. The executive is doing executive orders that's contrary to the Constitution. So we've kind of lost the separation of powers. It's all muddy.
How do we fix that problem?
You know, when we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, I guess a lot of us aren't doing that. So
yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we have an executive who's told us he has a pen and a phone. He will do whatever is necessary to accomplish his agenda. He stood up in the State of the Union address and said what? If Congress won't work with me, I will bypass them to accomplish whatever it is that I need to do. Here was the most disturbing part of that. You had at least 100 individuals that I could see that stood up and gave him an ovation. That just is incredible. The very individuals who have the responsibility to pass the law by way of constitutional powers, that is the legislative branch, stood up and gave him an ovation. Thank you for stealing our power, go to it. And then we know what happened the very next week. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee created a full employment caucus for one purpose: to facilitate executive orders. If I can't get it done through the legislative process, I will create a caucus that will simply put together executive orders and will present them to the president. We will bypass the legislative process. As far as I'm concerned, the individuals that are involved, like a Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and all the many others, many Republicans included, really we have one alternative: kick them out, is what it ultimately comes down to. Yeah, send them back to where they came from. This is a big problem. And I have to tell you, I mentioned I was a prosecutor for 12 years. I was in our homicide unit and our gang unit for a significant period of time. And one of the last jury trials that I did, I think, captures the problem that's going on in America today. We were doing jury selection, and I know there's some DAs in here and some law enforcement officials here, so you'll know what I'm talking about. During the jury selection process, we're going through and we're identifying the individuals that we want and that we don't want. And there's when we're getting rid of individuals, we do what we call challenges for cause. It's an opportunity to get rid of individuals that we don't believe. Ultimately, the judge makes the final determination. We don't believe that the individual can be fair and impartial. They're bringing something by way of their background. They maybe know something about the case. They don't like law enforcement. They don't like defense attorneys. Whatever the case may be, the judge is making a determination that they can't be fair and impartial. And as we were going through these challenges for cause, the judge started doing something that was illegal. And that was actually dismissing jurors for cause in their presence. That's illegal. You can't do it for some pretty obvious reasons. If the judge sees that, hey, that person's getting off, now what do you have? You've got jurors that are saying, wait a second, they got off, I got an excuse too. Let me give you my excuse. And so I simply said, Judge, may I approach? And I approached and I said, what you're doing, you can't do. The rules don't allow you to do this. And she tells me this. She says, Mr. Krauser, I need you to go sit back down. Right? We don't have time for this nonsense. We want to get this trial started. I said, Judge, I'm not going to go sit back down. You're not permitted to do this. The law doesn't allow you to do this. And I opened up the rules, the law. And I showed it to her. I said, it says you can't do it. It's a challenge for cause. Has to be done outside the presence of the jury. And she looks at me. She says, take your little rule book and go sit back down. And she says, if you don't take your rule book and go sit back down and get this trial started, I will hold you in contempt. And I said, Judge, all I'm asking is just as you demand that we follow the rules, you follow the rules as well. You can't do this. And so this conversation goes on at the bench. I think this captures exactly what's going on in America today. It's just a little rule book. Our Constitution, the rule of law, is just a little rule book. It's an inconvenience. And if I don't have anybody around me telling me that this is what I have to do, that is, I have to comply with the parameters of the Constitution, I'm not going to do it. Because sometimes governing is a tough game, especially when the Constitution tells you have to do certain things, or you may not do certain things. It's a tough game. And so this is what I see going on in America. Individuals at all levels of government being told, or telling others, or telling us, it's irrelevant, it's outdated. We see in our college campuses, we spend a lot of time on college campuses all over the country. And we experience, as you can imagine, going in with some of my ideas, they don't fit so well initially. You have students coming into these auditoriums with some pretty warped ideas about the way the world operates. And I go into the high schools. I'm spending 3 days in 3 of the high schools in the area. And I'm going to go in and talk to these kids about the rule of law. I'm going to engage them on the Fourth Amendment, on the First Amendment, maybe even on the Second Amendment. But the most common complaint that I hear when I do talk to them about the Constitution is that this document is somehow outdated. It was written by a bunch of old, dead white men who didn't care anything about anything other than their own property and money. It's all they cared about. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Perhaps they did have some of those desires, but they put together a document that has maximized freedom and to a large degree limited tyrannical impulses within our culture. But we're losing that. And so when I hear these young kids come in and talk about this, I can give you just one example, and I want to play this for you. I'm hoping that this will work and that you can hear this. I want to call out a Republican here. Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina. Do you remember the NSA? The news breaks on the NSA? Let's play just a piece of his interview, and I think this is very telling. See if we can hear this.
Yeah, we're very much under threat. Radical Islam is on the rise throughout the region. Homegrown terrorism is one of my biggest concerns. It's happening in our own backyard, and I'm glad the NSA is trying to find out what terrorists are up to overseas and inside the country.
Well, Senator, I don't know about you, but I've got Verizon. That means the government.
I do too.
Okay, you and I, and a lot of us here in the studio, have been tracked by the NSA following all of our phone detail. Apparently this program will expire on June the 19th unless it's renewed. Why do you think somebody somewhere is leaking this to this UK newspaper so that we would know about it right now?
You know, that's a good question, but I'm a Verizon customer. I don't mind Verizon turning over records to the government if the government's going to make sure that they try to match up a known terrorist phone with somebody in the United States. I don't think you're talking to terrorists. I know you're not. I know I'm not, so we don't have anything to worry about. I'm glad the activity is going on, but it is limited to tracking people who are suspected to be terrorists and who they may be talking to.
What are your thoughts on this? Is anybody deeply disturbed by this? You absolutely should be. I took this into a college classroom, and I played this. I actually played the video portion of this. Thank you. I played the video portion of this. And I asked the students, what do you think about this? And what do you think the majority of them said? He's right. If you don't have anything to hide, why would I be concerned about Verizon turning over records to the government? You know, it goes back to, I would ask them about being pulled over by the police. Would you submit to a search? The majority of them say, yeah. And I say, why? I don't got anything to hide. Really, is that what the Fourth Amendment's about? Not having something to hide? Because I wish I could have not a discussion behind closed doors. I want to have this discussion for everybody to see. Me and Senator Lindsey Graham have this discussion. Because here's what I would ask him. I would ask him, so the reason why you're okay with the NSA grabbing the records from Verizon is because unless you're doing something wrong and you don't have anything to hide, you really don't have anything to worry about. Therefore, the Fourth Amendment really doesn't kick in here. And he would probably say, yeah, that's right. And to which I would respond, will you remove the curtains from your home? What do you think he'd say to that? What do you mean, would I remove the curtains to your home? Why don't you remove the curtains from your home? Well, because I don't want people to know what's going on. I said, no, you have something to hide. You have something to hide in that home. If you got something to hide, we've got to do whatever is necessary to get inside that home to find out what's going wrong. He would never concede to that. But it's exactly what his philosophy dictates when it comes to NSA. The bottom line is when you talk about a guy like Senator Lindsey Graham, he believes that the Fourth Amendment is designed to only protect information that is criminal in nature. When the Fourth Amendment is about protecting our ability to decide when that information will be revealed. It allows us to control that information. And this is a man who's turned the Fourth Amendment literally on its head. And so you can see where this is a vicious cycle that we're dealing with in our culture today. It's a vicious cycle. We have individuals in government at the federal level, at the state level, and the local level that don't understand these principles. Yet they've taken an oath to these principles, to these ideas. And they violate these ideas every single day. And they go on national TV, and there's not really all that much of a big deal for them. That's a problem. We've created the problem, and I think the bottom line that I really want to convey today is this. The president is not the problem. Congress is not the problem. And the courts are not the problem. They are merely symptoms of the greater problem of we the people. When you have a population that doesn't understand the rule of law, when they don't understand the parameters of the Constitution, when they don't understand the purpose of the Constitution, when they don't understand the purpose of government, they in turn will elect individuals who don't understand those things either. And this is precisely what's going on. How is it that you can have an executive stand up and say, hey, I have no problem signing laws unilaterally? And you have individuals in our society saying no problems. Or you have Congress standing up and doing any number of things like Jim Clyburn. Anybody follow Jim Clyburn out of South Carolina? Listen to this. I want you to listen to this because I believe this captures in some pretty significant ways the problem.
Where in the Constitution is the federal government charged with maintaining people's health?
Well, there's not in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government has got anything to do with most of the stuff that we do. The federal government's got nothing in the Constitution to do with education. But I tell you what, if the federal government has not stepped into education, I don't think my parents would ever gotten one. My father was denied a high school education because of state law. The federal government had to step in and say, you cannot do that to African Americans.
Well, it was the federal courts that stepped in. Thanks be to God. that caused you to get the education you did. But if the Constitution doesn't authorize the federal government to have a Department of Education or to take care of people's health care, what's the sense of having it? You took an oath to uphold the Constitution. You can't go outside the Constitution because you think it's a good thing to do without violating that oath.
I would show me where in the Constitution it prohibits the federal government from doing this.
This guy's amazing. For those of you that didn't hear, started out asking, where in the Constitution do you have the authority? And he says, most of what we do in Washington, D.C. is probably not authorized by the Constitution. This is a guy on national TV with Andrew Napolitano who says most of what we do in D.C. is probably not authorized. And there seems to be no shame. And he's asked on the tail end of the conversation about, as the issue is pushed a little bit, he says, tell me where in the Constitution it tells me I can't do it. Wait a second. The guy hasn't read the Constitution. It's pretty clear he hasn't read the document because the first paragraph of the Constitution answers his question. It says, all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress. If it's vested in Congress, that means no one else has it, and you can't give it away. And so this is a man that says, most of what we do, probably not permissible. Tell me where it says we can't do it. Well, the 10th Amendment, just in case you forgot to read the first paragraph of the Constitution, there's this matching bookend called the 10th Amendment that says, if we haven't given it to you, you don't have it. End of story. It's the end of the story. And he hasn't read the document, and that individuals in South Carolina have voted this guy in, and there's not a movement to boot him out, blows me away to a degree. At the same time, I recognize the problem in the culture that we're dealing with. We have a significant problem with a society that doesn't understand the legislative powers. And Congressman Clyburn is a significant part of that problem. Listen to this. This is Tom Harkin, Senator Tom Harkin.
What this bill does is we finally take that step. As our leader said earlier, we take that step from health care as a privilege to health care as an inalienable right of every single American citizen. As I've said before, this bill is not complete. I've used the analogy of a starter, and which we can add additions and enhancements as we go into the future. But like every right that we've ever passed to the American people, we revisit it later on to enhance and build on those rights.
So a couple things here. Healthcare as an unalienable right, number one, and government gives us our liberties. This is a new one. I must have missed this. You know, when Thomas Jefferson, the 33-year-old red-haired wonder, writes this document called that Declaration, and he says, endowed by their creator, apparently he got it wrong. Apparently he got it wrong. It's endowed by their government, or the government. This is a man that fundamentally misunderstands where liberty comes from. And we've bought into the idea. We've bought into the idea as a culture that it's only government that can liberate us. On Thursday night, I'm going to be talking about this in a lot more detail, but let me just give you a clue in on this, what I'm going to be hammering away at. This is a cultural battle that we're dealing with in America. The election cycle battles are important, but they are not the most important. If you want to change things long term, you have to address the culture first and foremost. If all we're doing is focusing on election cycles, here's what's going to happen. The Republicans win, and the Democrats get really upset. And they rally the troops, and they utilize their resources, and 4 to 8 years later, we swing the pendulum back over to the other side. And the Republicans get upset, and they rally their troops and accumulate their resources, and we swing it back to the other side. There is a way to ensure that you win elections, and that we win elections for the next 100 years. And that's start refocusing on the cultural battle. Because this is the culture that we're dealing with in 2014 is a direct result of Woodrow Wilson and what he began 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, when he told us things like, if you want to understand the Declaration of Independence, don't read the preface. That's profound. He started something very, very powerful. What's the preface? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He says, if you want to understand the preface, well, if you want to understand the Declaration, don't read the preface. If you remove the preface, what's left? The 27 grievances. And he says, they were just as free as we are. And we are not bound by the words of the founders. Those are his words, not mine. We are not bound by the words of the founders. And we can address the problems that we have today in the way that we feel is appropriate. And then went on to say this in a nutshell. We believe that our Constitution is found on two principles. We in here believe this. Men and women are born free, and men and women with power cannot be trusted. That's why we have a Constitution. It can be captured in those two ideas. But if you look at Woodrow Wilson and FDR and LBJ and this administration, here's what they believe. Men and women are not born free, and men and women with power can be trusted. They've absolutely flipped the Declaration on its head. They believe that men and women with power are benevolent and that they will look out for our best interests. Well, we've learned these ideas before. You know, Plato's Republic, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, Sir Thomas More's Utopia. We've seen these ideas play out over and over and over again. This is simply an outdated idea coming to the forefront again in 2014. And I've got a problem with it. And I think all of you have a problem with this. We are being told that this Constitution is somehow outdated. So I want to take you back and just share an experience with you on this outdated Constitution. I'm a radio talk show host back in Phoenix. And I had a caller that chimed in one afternoon and said, you know, Mr. Krauser, you know, I'm really tired of all this Constitution nonsense. It's time to move on. You can talk about other things other than just the rule of law and all the issues that we're dealing with. It's time to move on, get a grip on reality. Quit holding on to this document that is old, dusty, outdated, archaic, evil. Get rid of it. So I let him talk. And then I simply said this when he was done. I said, tell me where. Tell me where in the Constitution it's outdated. Just give me one example. I'm wondering, is it the 13th Amendment that says no more slavery? That you can't hold individuals for involuntary servitude anymore? Is that the outdated idea found in this document? Or is it maybe the 15th Amendment that says all people can vote regardless of race? Or is it the 19th Amendment that says all individuals can vote regardless of gender? Is that where it's outdated? Or maybe what you're speaking of is the 14th Amendment that says equal protection under the law. The government cannot choose who it will protect and who it will harass. Is that what you're referring to? Or maybe you're actually referring to this idea of the 8th Amendment that says when the government utilizes its resources and ultimately convicts somebody, they cannot utilize cruel and unusual punishment as they put them away. Is that the outdated idea? Or maybe it's that silly 5th and 6th Amendment. You know, you can't use someone's silence against them. You can't force somebody to help the government build their case. Government's got to bring the goods. Or maybe it's that 6th Amendment, you know, that fair trial, speedy trial, public trial nonsense. You know, have a right to confront witnesses, have a right to compel my own witnesses to come in and testify on my behalf in the face of exorbitant government resources. And I have a right to have someone assist me through the process. Is that what you're speaking of? Because I'm not getting this. Or maybe it's this 2nd Amendment that says I have a right to defend myself, but even more than that, I have a right to defend myself and stand with other patriots against a government gone rogue. Or the 1st Amendment says I have the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the free exercise of religion, and the right to petition government when there are issues. Tell me where this document's outdated. I mean, we can go to the body of the Constitution, you know, those first 7 articles, where it tells government what they can do. And if they go beyond that, they violated their oath, and we have a right to kick them out. So tell me where this is outdated. So I waited, and what do you think the response was? It was a dial tone. It was a dial tone. And this is the thing. We have to go on the offensive. The Republican Party has to go on the offensive. We have to start mandating that the other side tell us why their ideas are better. Our ideas are better, and we can defend those ideas. The Republican Party platform, it's 62 pages long. When was the last time we read this together? It says we are the party of the Constitution. If it's the party of the Constitution, that Constitution has to become to a large degree front and center. Front and center of our debates. They're telling us it's old and dusty and outdated, but it's interesting when you have the arguments with them, they're not able to defend those positions that it's old, dusty, and outdated. They simply say it was written by a bunch of slave owners, which is incorrect as well. The minority of the individuals who signed those documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, were not slave owners. The majority of them did not have slaves. So next argument, please. What's the next argument you have? So we need to go on the offensive and start mandating, demanding, having these debates. I mentioned last night that two other things, and I'm going to sit down. I know you guys all work and you're doing your thing today. So two other final thoughts here. Professor Seidman you've all probably heard of him. Professor Seidman was the guy who went out on national TV a little over a year ago on ABC. He's Georgetown University and said what? Constitution's outdated. It's time to move on. And we flew out to Washington, D.C., Georgetown University, to visit with him. And I knocked on his door. And to make a long story, a very long story, very, very short, I challenged him to a debate. I had 2 national media outlets that were willing to televise a debate between me and him. What do you think he said?
No.
Not interested. After he contemplated over the course of 8 weeks whether or not this was a good idea or not. That's the problem. It's easy to sit behind a camera and spout your ideas. It's different when you have someone confronting you and say, you know what, you can say those things, but let's have an open debate. Let's have an open conversation. Let's engage in the contest of ideas. Because when we do these things, when we take on this dynamic of going on the offensive instead of just playing defense, you're going to see a sudden shift, and it's going to be very, very swift in this culture. Because when people know that you're on their trail, experiencing an intellectual beatdown in front of other people is not something that the other side wants. And when we engage them utilizing different tactics, making them taste their own medicine, we're going to see significant progress. And that's really what we're focused on. We want to have the debate. We want to have the dialogue. We want to go into the schools, whether it's high schools, college campuses, it doesn't matter. We want to have these discussions because what we enjoy hearing more than anything else is this. When those college students sit in that auditorium and we engage in dialogue with them and then have them come up and say, tell me something. Why have I never heard these ideas before? It happens everywhere we go. Every single place we go, why haven't I been told about these things? Why haven't I heard these ideas? Why isn't our teacher presenting these things to us? They're not presenting both sides. And if they're not presenting both sides, that should tell us something. There's an agenda that's being accomplished. You're teaching people, students, to think a certain way. And the only way you change that is this multi-directional approach that has to take place. Multi-directional, coming at them from all sides. Stop playing checkers while they engage in jiu-jitsu. Stop playing marbles. Because what we do really well, I'm a registered Republican, and what we do really well, as I've watched, is we like to play checkers and we wait for them to strike. Meanwhile, they're coming at us from all sides. We've got to go at them from all sides as well so they don't know what's hit them. And part of that comes through the argument, through the debate, and a willingness to have multiple people on multiple different fronts saying we want to have this discussion. Because when we have this discussion and the other side is able to hear this, we'll convince those people. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there say, you know, don't go on Anderson Cooper. Now stay away from those guys. I was on the Today Show and NBC Nightly News just recently, and people told me I was crazy. They said, they're going to make mincemeat out of you. I said, let's see this happen. And it was as a result of a bill that passed in Arizona, but was vetoed by the governor. It was SB 1062, the Religious Freedom Bill. I was a defender of that bill, despite the fact that all the legislators in Arizona were running for the hills. None of them would defend it in front of the media. It was an absolute shame. And as far as I'm concerned, those people need to be kicked out. If you can't stand for the First Amendment, the free exercise of religion, what are you doing in there? Because you're concerned about that next election. We need to have people that will stand up and defend these ideas, even in front of a hostile media that wants to try and rip us to shreds. We had a great time, by the way. We had a great time in those interviews. Let me leave you with this one final thought. Because I think this, my hope is that this will, together we can recognize, here's where we go together. Lockstep, arm in arm. World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. We were losing. And we were running for the hills. And we had flown in paratroopers at the time, members of the 82nd Airborne, to come in and take care of business. And there's a story of one particular tank that is moving away from the enemy. And he's going up a dirt road. And as he goes up this dirt road, there's a man that steps out. He's a member of the 82nd Airborne. And he steps out, and you can see he's got about 3 days worth of growth on his face, deep, hollow, sunken eyes. He's got an M4, and he's got a handgun on his side, and he's ready to take care of business. And he stands up in the middle of the road as this tank is coming towards him. And the tank stops in front of him. It's an American tank. And the tank commander asks him, what are you doing? And this man from the 82nd Airborne says, are you looking for a safe place? Imagine that. Asking the tank commander, you're looking for a safe place. And the tank commander says, yes, I am. And the paratrooper says, get behind me. Get behind me. I'm a member of the 82nd Airborne, and this is as far as the bastards are going to go. They're not going any further than this. And I think that's the mentality that we have to take on. This is as far as we're going to allow them to go. This is as much freedom as we're going to allow them to infringe upon. This is as far as we're going to allow an executive to go, to breach his authority that we've given him through our Constitution. This is as far as we're going to allow Congress to go. Regardless of the letter behind your name, this is as far as we're going to allow you to go. And if you want to compromise our liberties away, we will kick you out. If you want to compromise on that oath that you've taken, we're going to kick you out. When we start to send this message and realize that this is about saving a republic and not preserving someone's political aspirations because they're our friend or somebody that we know, they don't understand these ideas. They don't understand the parameters of their authority. They should not be in office. From my perspective, it's that simple. So I look forward. I hope that you'll come out on Thursday night, because I'm convinced, I will say this, and I'm unashamed to say this. I believe that America's best days are yet to come. I absolutely believe it is, because there is this groundswell that's going on in all 50 states where people are tired of this. They want to see change, but they're looking for people with courage to stand up and lead the fight. And so it's an honor for me to be here with you as a part of that group that has the courage to lead this fight. Thank you so much for having me.